All right, so welcome everyone to the August Leadership Workshop on whether your organization, whether your leadership is future ready, global and diverse. A quick introduction to August Leadership. We are a New York-based global executive search and leadership advisory firm. One of the distinguishing factors of our business is that we are relatively young, but we are born global and born diverse, and we really believe in diversity. And we believe that that leadership strength comes through diversity, and we understand how to make organizations inclusive. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. My name is Lukas Beech. I'm a partner in the Seoul office of August Leadership, and I specialize in the industrial sector. The two subject matter experts that we have with us today is Alisha Fernanda, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Bloomberg in Asia Pacific. So we're delighted that she's able to join us based out of Hong Kong, where she's responsible for Bloomberg's diversity and inclusion strategy across Asia Pacific, with a very strong focus on implementation of programs and initiatives supporting Bloomberg's enterprise-wide DE&I goals and regional priorities. Alisha has a fantastic background and a very long bio, so I'm going to just be brief, but we're delighted that somebody with such a depth of expertise and a lot of recognition awards is able to be part of our discussion today. So thank you so much, Alisha. Also from our own camp at August Leadership, we have Umran Beba, based out of New York, but currently in Istanbul. Umran is a ISO certified DE&I specialist and has been named one of the greatest living business minds of Turkey by Forbes magazine, featured in Fortune magazine 3 years in a row for the most powerful women in business. And she's won numerous awards and inspired leaders around the world as a mentor and as an advocate for diversity. She's also been featured in 4 books and is in fact in Turkey because of another book that's coming fresh off the press. So Umran brings a significant amount of experience in the consumer goods industry and as a business leader and HR expert. So thank you so much for our panelists for joining us today, and we'll go to the next slide. Umran, I'm going to hand over to you at this point to talk about future-ready organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lukas, and Alisha, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. I see a lot of familiar faces. I had the privilege of working in Asia Pacific actually as the president for PepsiCo for 3.5 years, from 2010 to 13, and then as the CHRO for Asia, Middle East, North Africa after that, 2013 to 16. So I had many great relationships in that part of the world. Currently, I'm based in Greenwich, Connecticut, near Manhattan, but today I am in Turkey. So it's a global, global life, I guess, for most of us. Today, I will kick off this conversation with a couple of research results about future-ready organizations and also the new world skills. And then we will tie it to the diversity, equity, and inclusion together with Alisha and her experiences and best practices. In terms of future-ready organizations, we would like to start actually based on the Harvard Business Review study and, of course, our experiences. Today, each corporation is really starting their work with their purpose. The vision actually is integrated with the purpose, values, and culture. So without purpose, I think just focusing on financials is becoming an old, let's say, old goal in its own. And definitely the idea of purpose, including sustainability, including especially focus on the social and community aspects, diversity and inclusion at the workplace is becoming more and more important. And this is integrated in the values of the companies today, and that creates the culture in the location, but also around the globe. So there's a lot of integration. And if you look at on the next slide, we will see how actually organizations are approaching the complex agenda of today. I mean, we have seen, of course, with the pandemic in the last 3 years, it's like a crisis for the globe, but also there are social matters happening around the globe. There are economic and other type of crises happening. So managing all these crises and still staying profitable, growing with purpose is not easy. So every organization is really trying to be more agile with lean structures, fast decision making, structures where there are less layers and the span of control is actually much higher, and moving into more of the agile ways of working. And as that's happening, of course, the focus is still growing with purpose. And we have to use more data and analytics. We have to adapt digitalization, make sure that our business models are scalable, and a continuous learning organization is key to this agenda. So within all that complexity, I think each of our employees and leaders uh, will focus on some future skills that are needed going forward. So the first one that we are seeing very, very critical for employees, leaders, organizational stakeholders is the change agility and adaptive mindset. So we have to work with a lot of scenarios to be successful. And if one option is not working, then we have to move to the contingency plans and be ready as an organization to succeed in this uncertain environment. The next skill that we need in this complex environment is the database strategist approach. So seeing through the clutter, because there is a lot of information coming to all of us as employees, as leaders, organizations, and we have to develop a visionary and agile strategy despite all that data and clutter. The third one, in terms of new world skills, on the next page, we can say the global perspective and connectivity. We have seen it incredibly during this pandemic. It started as a local problem, it became a regional issue, and all of a sudden it was a global issue actually. And therefore, I think our leaders and employees having a global perspective is very, very critical. In order to get there, I think there is a continuous learning agenda with curiosity and purpose, understanding the global matters, understanding the cultures, the differences in cultures and all that. And coming to the next one, in terms of skills, we have seen the rise of empathy, the importance of empathy during these times. And going into the future, we still believe communicating with empathy, listening with empathy and curiosity will be there to stay with, despite the robots, despite the digitalization, all those efforts. So let's keep empathy in the center of everything. And moving forward, we are also seeing that the power of many, meaning that alone we are of course powerful, but we will be much, much powerful, more powerful with the others, with the collaboration, with learning together, but still showing humility as a leader and leading through the uncertainties with the power of the team. So as we are talking about the power of the team, I would say it's a great moment to call in Alisha and really understand from her experience. The teams are very important. Diversity of teams are very important. But if you look at your enterprise-wide strategies and your Asia Pacific strategies, how do you manage that? Because at the global level, certain things matter maybe more, but in Asia Pacific, we know that you need to focus on and adapt to a very regional strategy. Alisha, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Umran, firstly, I would say I'm probably not going to share anything that's new to this audience. You're here for a reason, and you're here because you're probably senior leaders within your firms. But one thing I would say is at Bloomberg, we're very cognizant that we are a New York-based company, and that New York is not actually the center of the universe. Yes, it is what we call, a mothership, but it's not the center of the universe. And so our global strategy, especially when it comes to DE&I, we don't talk specifically about any dimension of diversity. For example, our number one priority is looking to identify, attract, develop, retain, and accelerate underrepresented talent. Now, underrepresented talent here in Asia or in APAC is very different to what it is in America or in London or in EMEA, for example. So in America, we talk about underrepresented talent in the sense of Black, Latinx, and Asian talent. Here in APAC, when we talk about underrepresented talent, we don't actually talk about the underrepresented population. We actually turn it and flip it on its head, because we look at our leadership bench and we know, as of today even, and historically, we've had a tendency to parachute in talent from outside of the region into the region. And so our leadership bench at the moment is made up of non-local talent, but our regional employee group is made up a majority of local talent. And so the way we think about underrepresented talent is the underrepresentation of the wider community, wider employee base in our leadership roles. And so that's how we look at the global strategy and what it means, underrepresented talent, and how it plays out here in region is very different. And so that's kind of how we balance, and that's how I certainly approach balancing out what our head office wants versus what our region really needs.
At the end of the day, I think whichever way we look at it, either at the enterprise level or at the local level, I think inclusion is the most critical item, I think, within that, because you have to include all these diverse people, either they are local, non-local, Black, Latinx, whatever is the definition. And I know that you had a very good approach to the inclusion at different levels and how you take it in your organization. And I would like to share, with your comments with the audience here, the cultural cohesion program.
Yeah, I will take a step back and then I'll talk about cultural cohesion. So for Bloomberg, we talk about the inclusion being everyone's responsibility, not just line managers, not just senior executives, but every single person, from the newest employee to the man with his name on the door, right? Mike Bloomberg. And what we talk about is 4 fundamentals of inclusion, and every single individual is responsible for creating this or aligning to these 4 fundamentals. So as an individual, if you can create an environment around you that ensures that everyone feels welcomed, safe, both psychologically and physically safe, valued, and respected, that creates that culture of inclusion. So if everyone that I interact with feels welcome, safe, valued, and respected, they're going to feel included by me. And if they can reciprocate that and make me feel those 4 fundamentals, I will be feel included by them. And if every single individual can do that, I know it sounds rudimentary, but sometimes you need to make it that simple for people to grasp the concept. And so to help people do that, welcome, safe, valued, and respected, especially here in Asia, we recognize that culture and the differences in culture is complex and nuanced. I think if you're outside of Asia, sometimes you look at Asia and you think of it as one culture, right? Asia in general is one culture, but we all know that it's not. And not only that cultures are complex and nuanced here, but there are interregional conflicts that are at play here as well. And so what we did was we built a program that takes cultural competency to the next level. So we've all heard, unconscious bias, cultural competency, but really when you do unconscious bias training, you're not helping to address the issue, right? You're just making people aware of what their unconscious biases are, but you're not arming them with well, what do I do now? And that's same with cultural competency. A lot of organizations roll out cultural competency training and think, okay, we're done. We've helped our employees be better at this. But actually, we've taken it a step further and we've built a program called Cultural Understanding and Cohesion. And that's really what we're talking about. When you and I can understand each other's culture and learn how to navigate the differences, we most likely are going to be able to cohesively be in the same working environment, but be able to collaborate better. And it's all about understanding how, arming our employees with the ability to spot cultural differences, to have honest conversations. And we talk about being humble, because I don't know what I don't know, and if I offend, I apologize, but I would really love to understand how this plays out in your culture and how I can be respectful of that. So the cultural cohesion and cultural understanding program is all about that. How do you spot the differences? How do you have a conversation about it? How do you navigate through it so that you can be more collaborative? And we know that when teams are inclusive of difference and they can collaborate better, and then in return always leads to better results and more innovation, which is a cornerstone for our business. And I'm sure a lot of your businesses is you strive for innovation, and you really can't do that if people are feeling left out and you're not feeling like you're reflective of the community in which you live and work.
Yeah, you reminded me actually my move from Turkey to Hong Kong in 2010. I moved there as the president of Asia Pacific, and I was covering 25 countries. And in my team, I had about 9 different nationalities. But I think throughout the region, we had 21 different languages being spoken. So the whole diversity, when you go there, you understand the nuances. And I was actually exposed to a 2-day cultural training about different countries, their histories, connections, and how they feel about each other. That was very, very helpful, but it's not enough. Every day you learn when you visit a country, when you work with your partners. In our case, they were actually our partners, butlers, franchise, organizations. So that was an incredible learning curve. And I want to ask you about that reality. People say Asia Pacific. Oh, okay, it's one region, one. However, you also mentioned about 24 countries. So, in relation to the cultural cohesion, but how do you make sure employees feel still, understanding each other, connected? Do you have employee resource groups also, to facilitate some of that understanding?
Yeah, so let me explain something with that program. We have 3 different variations of that program. One for individual contributors, one for people leaders, because there's a different skill set needed for if I'm a leader of people. And uniquely, I think it's unique at Bloomberg, where almost all our employees don't report to someone that is in the same location as them. And so we have a different program for leaders that manage people or that have direct reports in a different location to them. Because again, we recognize that the skill set to be able to engage, to be able to manage, support, but also to enable and empower your people when you're not in the same location with them is very different as well. And so we had 3 very separate modules for the 3 different audiences that we were rolling this program out to. Now, you asked me about how we keep that engagement. There's a few things. We absolutely have ERGs at Bloomberg. We call them communities. And our communities have chapters in all of our main offices, our main locations, of which we have 7 here in Asia. So Hong Kong, Singapore, India, Japan, Australia, Korea, and mainland China are our main offices. And then we have all of ASEAN, which have smaller ERGs. So in our main locations, we have the women's communities, we have working families, we have, we call it Be Able, but it's a disability community and LGBT. I'm going to just pause and say LGBT and talk about LGBT, because in some of the locations that we operate, being gay is still illegal, but we still have LGBT communities in those locations, because what I said goes back to what I said before. We truly believe that we need to create an environment where everyone feels welcome, safe, valued, and respected. And having a community for the LGBTQ community within a location where they can't be themselves outside of our four walls was really, really important to us, to demonstrate that commitment. And so, yes, we do that. And our communities, whilst they're focused on singular dimensions of diversity, we really talk about intersectionality, and we encourage communities to cross-collaborate on initiatives, to advocate for things together and not in singular. And we see that play out a lot. And even through the pandemic, we've actually seen more engagement from our employees in the community space than less. I think a lot of the questions I've been getting is, how have you kept employees engaged through the pandemic when everyone is working from home? We've actually seen the opposite. We're seeing more employees being engaged because they miss that interaction, and the either the initiatives, the events that we're rolling out through our communities are actually based on what they have told us they wanted. And an example of that is we have internal chats, and we saw on the internal chat, for example, in Hong Kong, a lot of parents were talking about should they or shouldn't they vaccinate their child. And we were seeing a lot of concerns from our employees, should I or shouldn't I? And so we picked up on that, and we went to get one of the top pediatricians here in Hong Kong. And we also have a partnership with Johns Hopkins University in America. And we got a specialist from Johns Hopkins to do a discussion with our working families community, to talk about vaccination, to talk about the differences from Pfizer and all of the rest, to give our employees a bit more information that they can make a somewhat sounded decision. And so because of that, we see more employees wanting to be involved and wanting to be engaged, because we're responding to what their needs are at this moment in time.
Excellent. I think this whole idea of community is very different, let's say, at the enterprise level and at the local level, but also there are similarities, for example, women, I'm sure, and different abilities. So how do you approach that, the employee resource groups or communities at the global level, at the enterprise-wide level, and in your Asia Pacific?
Yeah, so we try to globally, we try to get all of our chapters, so the different chapters across the world, to agree on one or two things that they're all going to work on together. And I'll give you an example. So the working families community and the women's community in 2019 decided parental leave was their number one thing that they thought was the important thing that from a global perspective they wanted to work on together. And so they rallied around that really focus. And I should say before in 2019, our maternity leave policies reflected the local government and the local legislation. But our women's community and working families community were very strong in the fact that in some locations, the amount of leave a woman gets was insufficient for her to even just recover from the birth itself. So it was not seen as sufficient for them to be coming back into the office. So as a global community of women in our EIG, they rallied behind it, they advocated for change. And I'm really proud to say that Bloomberg were one of the first in Asia to offer 6 months full paid leave. And that happened in 2019. But that's how we work globally.
Yeah.
We get all of our chapter leads together. We ask them to really collaborate on, think about one or two things that you think you want to make a difference in this year, and rally behind that. And that's what we've seen, and we do that year on year.
No, that's great, because being in the US, I observed that the maternity leave is just like 2 weeks, and the companies, they need to kind of boost it up, and there's a lot of, as you say, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months type of offers. And 6 months is really good, because that's the moment where you can feel comfortable to leave. You mentioned about a couple of best practices already, but I just want to hear from you. What are the 3 things that, you know, this audience should leave here based on your experience, the best practices at Bloomberg that you would like to provide to the audience here?
Wow, gosh. Oh gosh, it's a hard one. I would say the first one is focus on 1 to 2 things and do it well, then trying to do everything. Because a lot of the times people, actually our Bloomberg clients who don't have D&I specialists in their organizations, I get lent out to them for free a lot of the time. So I get a lot of clients coming and asking me that question, where do we start? D&I is such a wide-ranging topic that we don't know where to start. And what happens, we find, is when firms or people think it's too hard, then they are paralyzed with fear and they end up doing nothing. And so my advice is always to look at the makeup of your employee base and figure out what's the 1 or 2 things, if you did them really, really well, it would make the biggest impact, and start there. And many organizations then look at that and say, well, we'll start with gender, because male female is probably the biggest split when it comes to diversity, and that's okay. I think a lot of the times people say, well, we can't be seen as just doing this, but don't forget that if you work on things that are gender based, it has impacts for everyone else. For example, when we decided to change our parental leave policy, we saw an uptick in men actually taking up 6 months leave. So it wasn't just a policy for females, but male colleagues also benefited from that. And so don't be afraid to start small, but focus on 1 to 2 things that you can do well. That's my number 1 piece of advice. My second is, what I would say is be really thoughtful about the data that you have, because again, what gets measured gets done, right? And so if you don't have the data, think about how you can get the data. And if you have the data, use it. A lot of firms are afraid to use it or don't have the data to be able to inform their decisions. And then that leads them going down, rabbit holes, or doing things that they then come to the end of the year and saying, well, I've done all of this stuff and I can't see a difference. So use the data to inform your actions or your decisions, or where you're going to focus your energy. And if you don't have the data, then look outside. There's a lot of benchmarking data or a lot of data out there that you can use to inform your decisions. Especially here in Asia, you've got community businesses, diversity and inclusion network, that they do a lot of research and they share a lot of the data. So depend on organizations like that if you don't have it yourself. The third thing I would say, this is a hard one because there's so many things I can say. So the third thing is empower your employees through EIGs. You would be surprised at how much insight we get from our EIGs that have then informed our programming, our strategies. And it's not just about employee engagement, it's business decision making. And a real example I can give you is in Australia, our employees, sorry?
I think we have to,
Microphone?
yes.
So my example is in Australia, our employees were coming to us, our salespeople were coming to us and saying, hey, we are not getting our foot in the door on some of our business pitches because we are not seen as being serious about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. So that came directly from our EIGs, and that gave us insight to what we should be doing as a firm. And so we got really involved in the reconciliation movement. We have our own reconciliation action plan, and I'm really, really excited and proud to share that our salespeople, I just got an email just before Christmas that said, I won this deal because we were the only firm that came that had a reconciliation action plan. And so use your EIGs to get insights like that, because they're not just, a nice to have. I think a lot of times people think EIGs are nice to have. It's for employee engagement. It's there to make employees feel good, but it can actually inform business decisions and strategies.
Excellent. I mean, most of the points you mentioned are also part of the international standard recently launched, 30415 for diversity, equity, inclusion. It starts with the infrastructure, to have the infrastructure, then continues with having the data, using the data in the right fashion, and then, building a culture using the employees' power. So very much in line actually with those global standards. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation.